This is going to be a serious video about stereotyping. So if you're not in the mood for that, I understand. I uploaded 2 other videos so that you guys would have something more fun to look at and you wouldn't have to stay for this. Because I know I said I was going to upload a video every day and I didn't want to do 2 back-to-back days of, serious talk. But I really wanted to make this video because of the conversation I had with a fellow YouTuber, Purple Badger, who I love, about Tara from True Blood. And in the video that spurred the conversation, I was talking about the season 5 premiere, and I talked about how they kind of made her this feral black vampire and why I would be upset if they continue to do that, because I found that to be very problematic to do. And Purple Badger implied that I was reaching with this example because, and that maybe because I was black, I was seeing something that may have offended me that wasn't there. And I'm kind of paraphrasing, so if that's not really what you think you said, Purple Badger, please, feel free to defend yourself. I'm not trying to attack you because I love you. We tend to disagree about certain stuff. So I had to make this video to really discuss this whole issue because I find that the whole idea that, touching on the whole minorities want to be offended and why I think this is a problematic thing and why stereotyping of characters of color, and to clarify, people of color does not equate specifically to black people. This includes all minority groups. So it's not to say that I'm just talking about black people in specific nature, but because that's something I have the most experience with, considering, my skin color, I mainly talk about that because I don't want to put words into other minorities' mouths. I think it's important for all of us to both stick together, but also realize that, all of our different kinds of oppression are different. And while it's not an oppression Olympics, it's all different, and we shouldn't have to piggyback on one another to kind of prove our points because everything is different, and I don't feel 100% comfortable in speaking for another racial group unless I feel I have enough evidence to back up my points. So I'm not ignoring other groups. I'm not saying that other groups don't have equal problems that are also minorities, but I am talking for the one that I am most specific with so that I am not speaking for other people. And also to clarify, not all black people are the same, so they're not all going to agree with me on this, but this is my opinion and I just thought it was important to put out there. First of all, the idea that the whole minorities are looking to be offended thing is quite frankly ridiculous. I mean, I do not wake up in the morning and think, God, please, please let something offend me today so I can bitch about it. So I can be reminded about how othered I am in society. It doesn't give me any joy in any sort of way to be reminded of racist stereotypes when I'm watching television. I don't have to look for them. They are already there for me to see. And I have to see them both in real life and in my media. And like I said in my It's Racist Bud video, stereotypes do not exist in a vacuum. Just because you make it a fantasy world and you put in vampires doesn't mean that the implications of what is shown is any less problematic. This whole argument, I think, is used to really downgrade our own opinions about what we think is going on. Because, that's why they have terms like the race card. When you are knowledgeable of racism in society, you see it clearer than if you are ignorant of it. If I go back to when I was 15, 16 years old, I would not have these thoughts, I would not have these opinions, because I was not taught to look at culture and judge it to see that if it was actually doing something that was progressive towards my race, because I stupidly was very colorblind when I was little. I thought all races were equal, I thought that whole thing was beyond us, and so for me, I used to think that, oh, why are you making such a big deal out of this? But now that I have grown up and read and learned my history and learned about the implication of these stereotypes and what they were meant to say about my group of people, I am more, not sensitive towards it, but I cannot ignore it the way I could when I was younger, because now I'm aware of it and what it means, and seeing it constantly perpetuated and seeing how that perpetuation affects me in my everyday life has made me a person who will talk about it even when people don't want to hear it. And I'm not trying to force feed it. I don't bring it into every single conversation. But when I see it on a show that it has always had problematic issues, I'm not going to skirt around it. Because if it had been like a one-time thing, or it had been the only thing that was going on with Tara that was problematic, I probably would not have brought it up that much, because there were other things to talk about that are also problematic on that show, which I brought up. But because they have constantly shitted on Tara and used so many stereotypes to both make Tara into a character, and stereotypes have played into part of how she was received in certain storylines, I feel the need to bring it up here. Second point. There has never been a time in history when people were fighting for equal rights in any kind of way, or talking about stereotypes and racism, where the majority of people thought, yeah, we live in a racist society, this place sucks. This is throughout history. Anyone who spoke out about these racial issues was always seen as rocking the boat, looking for trouble, not letting the natural course of having racism die on its own carry out. If you read, if you look at Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham prison, he is interested in that. Like, people were criticizing him for rocking the boat for saying these things. And if you go back and look at statistics and stuff, white people back then, in the time that we would consider racist, did not think that we lived in a racist society. They thought that we were doing perfectly fine. And this has always been going on. Whenever you're going against the norm and trying to say this is wrong, people are always going to say that you're looking for trouble. So when people are saying that, like, you are seeing a problem that isn't there and you're just trying to push it, that's something that has always been said. That is not something that's unique or special. And if that has always been said throughout all these periods of time, even in periods that we can say now we're racist, what makes now different from then? We cannot assume that because we have made progress, that we are suddenly a clean slate, that all of the problems of the past have become erased, because they're not. Because those things are still perpetuated in our society. And, you know, I was listening to even though this doesn't deal with race, I was listening to somebody say earlier, a blogger that I really like, on that guy with the glasses, on an old review of her, saying that she doesn't believe that women have as much to gripe about as feminists like to say. And I think that's really false. I think that just because we have made progress, either as a gender or a race or as a sexual orientation, does not mean that we are where we should be as a society. And the comparisons to the past hold us back, because we are always being compared to the lowest common denominator. And, you know, so for me, that's my whole thing. It doesn't the criticisms of saying that we've made improvement does not make our present society perfect, and doesn't make the stereotypes that we see in the media now anywhere near okay. And thirdly, the big thing that I had to talk about is this, like, one of the points she might have brought up is maybe because I'm black, I'm seeing this in a way that it might not really be, and that my race is kind of blocking me from seeing what might actually be trying to be said. Being white does not make you an impartial observer to the issue, especially when your argument is deflecting in order to make it seem as though everyone faces the exact same prejudice. Just like color blindness, which is like a really popular thing to say, like, I don't see color, I don't see black, blue, blah, 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 whatever rainbow, Crayola you want to talk about. This does not actually do anything to help people of color. The very fact that you think that not being that race gives you a better position to judge how they should feel about stuff is extremely privileged thing to say, to be quite frank about that. Because you're basically saying that we are too passionate about our own issues that we cannot see when we're wrong about stuff. And I think that's a very narrow-minded thing to say, because we are intelligent. We are intelligent people. We can judge our own situation just as well. And that kind of argument just really is kind of skirting the larger issue. It's trying to say, like, no, it's not a big deal. And the whole try of, like, everyone now wants to feel like, it's kind of weird, because with stuff like interethnicity, like, trans ethnicity, which is when people are like, I feel like I should be this racial group because I identify with that and stuff like that. It's like there is this kind of idea that we all have to deal with some sort of oppression. Like, whenever someone talks about issues of race, it's always like, what about white people? When we talk about issues of gender, it's like, what about men? You talk about homosexuals, it's always, what about somebody else? There's always trying to deflect and make it seem like everyone else has the same problem, which I don't understand. I don't know why people want to feel like they are being oppressed in the exact same way. And I don't think that's fair, because everyone's situation is different. It's kind of why I don't think movements should piggyback on one another, because I feel like every single person's situation is different. Every single civil right thing is different. And to piggyback on it, on one another, just weakens it, because we don't all deal with the same issues. It's kind of like why I don't like comparisons to the civil rights movement concerning African Americans and other minorities with the gay rights movement, because I feel like those two things, while I understand the similarities, they don't perfectly mesh, because you can be a civil rights activist in terms of race and be a homophobe. Perfect example of the people from the Westboro Baptist Church. The man who is in charge of that was involved with the civil rights movement. And so, you know, to me, I think it's strange when people are like, I am the gay Martin Luther King. It doesn't work, because you're dealing with a completely different issue, because Martin Luther King, there's a real chance that he would have been anti-gay. There's a possibility that could happen. And just like I don't think it's appropriate to say that you are the straight Harvey Milk, because you're not dealing with that homophobia. And so this whole trying to challenge everything and make it one big, you know, oppression stew, and like, look at all this stuff that goes on, is completely it hurts more than it helps, because you're not focusing on the important things for those individual people. You're just making it one blanket, one onesie, snuggie fits all of oppression, and that's not fair to anyone who's involved with that. Now that being said, it's not to say that if you're white, you can't write books about Black history or teach it or discuss it or make comments about it. That, I think that also limits conversation anyway. But when a white person is seen as being better at observing Black culture because they are white, that's a problem, because that's all it is observing and seeing it at a scope, but you don't live it. You know, you can talk about how I'm seeing something that doesn't exist, but I am also living with the implications of what was going on, which brings me to my major point here is to really understand why the pharaoh stereotype thing is bothersome. You have to look at the history of how Blacks specifically have been stereotyped in the media. One of the biggest stereotypes that was surrounding Black people in America and other peoples of color to another degree is how they are not intelligent. This is a huge thing. If you look back at when social Darwinism was really big in the country, but during the Industrial Revolution, social Darwinism was a huge way, and all during that time and later on, there was a bunch of what we call now scientific racism, stuff that was used to kind of show that these non-Anglo-Saxon minorities, that they were ruining the American culture because they're mixing, and it wasn't just, you know, it wasn't just Blacks, it was also the new immigrants, like we know when we learn in history, when it was people coming from the Slavic countries and those kind of places, it was seen as they were all being not intelligent. That's kind of digressing. Going back to African Americans, some of the biggest stereotypes about us as a race has always been that we are that we're primitive, that we are there to serve, and that we're simple-minded, and that's how people justified slavery. And there's actually this quote. I can't remember who exactly said it. I will look it up and post it. But they said, like, the African is, like, incapable of self-care, and it sinks into lunacy under the burden of freedom, and that it is a mercy to grant him guardianship and protection from mental death. So the whole argument is that slavery existed because Black people, by their nature, were crazy. They were wild, and they were meant to, and they needed to be controlled. And, you know, if you talk specifically with Black women about them being wild and unruly, and the reason why they had, like, you know, we had big butts and stuff was because we were so sexually wild, and so it was okay to rape us and whatever. And that's why some stuff that happens with Tara in season 3 and how people talked about that is kind of problematic to me. But just going back to this specifically, when Tara is transformed until the very end of that episode, the second episode, she does not speak. She makes all these growling animal noises. She doesn't communicate in any sort of intelligent way. And considering also they put on her, this also just further pissed me off about how we're treating her character. And this is not consistent with vampire turning, which is what Badger was trying to say. But I disagree, because vampires are hyper-able creatures. They may have some animalistic traits, but they're not feral. Because feral also deals with their not being culturalized. They're separated from culture, and that's not what vampires are. And to look at Jessica, when she was turned, I mean, she spoke, she communicated. There was no indication that she was out of her mind. And the other thing is that Tara also might have had brain damage from getting shot in the head. That's how they explain her being feral. But it also still is problematic, because in the original source material, there was a vampire who was that. And that was seen as being, you know, they were broken. They weren't a good vampire. When her character was white in the books, she had, you know, she was married. She had her own job. She had a pretty stable life. And while I know they had to add stuff up for TV, it disturbs me that in the transition from making her from a white character to a Black character, they changed her, but gave her all these stereotypes and added all these stereotypes on top of her that are very problematic when they all come together. And if it was just one thing, or if they had, you know, if she was more fleshed out and not just being portrayed as the angry Black woman from day one, I would be more forgiving of the show. But that hasn't happened, so I'm not very forgiving about it. And the other thing she said is that saying about the whole, like, if it was a white chick. But saying that no one would complain if it was a white chick is an unequal comparison, because no such stereotype exists for white people as a race. Now, there have been groups of ethnic whites that have been stereotyped, like I mentioned before about when the new immigrants came. Yes, but that has not ever been seen as a collective whiteness stereotype. And since society still thinks that all Black people are the same, hence why you get terms like African American that really don't make that much sense considering the history and culture and all that other kind, and geography, but, you know, whatever. Stereotypes are still racially collective, and they vary when it comes to stuff like shit. If it happened to a white woman, at the very most it might have been sexist, but which is equally bad in its own right to be sexist. When it comes to like black women specifically, we don't get a lot of really good representation, and even when we do, those characters get massive fan hatred. I mean, some of the stuff that gets said about some female black characters on the internet and online is just, it's quite frankly horrible, and it's both sexism and racism coming into play in this, but it's really, really just disheartening to read some of these comments. Yet we are expected to just watch shows that depict really strong white women and be satisfied with that because it's supposed to empower all women, even if we can identify with it. And that argument about it empowers all of us, to me, just isn't true. I mean, I love Buffy, but I can't relate to her. I mean, she doesn't look anything like me. Buffy, at the end of the day, looks like the ideal, which is not connected to me in any way. For the most part, you know, I've never seen an argument about it empowers all women used with other women of color. When people talk about like the best action female heroines, everyone says the same ones: Buffy, Xena, Ripley, Sarah Connor. But yet no one ever says Coffee or any of the people from Pam Grier movies. But she created the American action girl. I mean, she is the reason why we have Ripley and the reason why we have Sarah Jane. But no one ever puts her on their list or talks about them when I just have people bring up about strong female characters. But yet, and no one ever is like, you know what, I'm a white woman, but Coffee, identify with her 100%. Because that's just not how it works. The only action female character who is black who I've seen, you know, well, who is universally kind of liked is Zoe from Firefly. And I mean, like, just looking at other kinds of media, is Living Single and Girlfriends as well known as Six in the City or Friends, Moesha as Boy Meets World. I mean, there's a sense that white is supposed to be for everyone, but if it's in another group, it's for that other group. And so this crossover is supposed to happen from whites to non-whites, but the non-whites to whites never really happens unless it participates in some tomfoolery, which is a whole nother topic. Like, when it comes to talking about this issue, it's just like, it's frustrating to talk about it sometimes. And someone asked me, like, she asked me if I'll ever stop seeing it as like an issue of blackness, if it'll just be a universal thing. And to me, it's like, I will never stop being black, and these things will never stop affecting me because the stereotypes have never stopped. So why should I stop speaking up against them? And ignoring them does not stop the problem. And to really demonstrate this, I need to bring up an anecdote. And I'm sorry to bring it up because I just want to talk in statistics, but I need to talk about this because I think it brings home my point properly. Where I grew up in New York City, because I'm from Brooklyn, is not a big Native American population, indigenous people population. Most of them are like in Suffolk County or upstate New York, where I go to school now. So when I was growing up, my main exposure to Native American peoples was through Peter Pan, Pocahontas, and Westerns. Like, my mom is a big Western fan. She loves John Wayne movies, Maverick, Gunsmoke, all that crap. So that's how I saw Native American peoples. And so as a kid, and even when I was as a kid, I would not realize that doing that whole mouth chant thing was offensive, and no one ever told me it was. No one ever stopped to tell me when I was a kid, like, that is offensive. You're basically mocking them. You know, to me, it was all like they all wore the headdress, they all had the feather, they all had the face paint, and no one ever told me that. And all the people at my school who were like, oh yeah, I'm like 1/3 Cherokee or whatever, they never said anything about it too. They did the same thing. You know, that they were in touch with the spirituality and the trees and the chief. That was all, in my mind, that was true facts. And when I went to school, only things I learned about Native American peoples was, one, you don't call them Indians, you call them Native Americans, but that's not even really true because they prefer to be called by whatever their tribal name is, but that's another topic again. And two, Pocahontas is not and should never be taken as historically accurate. No one ever said to me, what you're doing is wrong, how you dress up is wrong, and everyone has that same costume. You see people dressed up as, like, you know, chieftains or Pocahontas characters or stuff like that. Or, you know, all the baseball teams and mascots who are all, you know, Native American stereotypes. But no one ever told me those were bad things. No one ever told me that those were wrong. Even as I went into school, up until high school, I don't think I ever had a conversation with somebody where they told me this is wrong. I found that out on my own when I actually was reading and did some stuff, and I found out about like, difference between Plains Indians and other types of, like, Native American groups. And so I had to learn on my own. No one told me that I was being racist. But just because I didn't know I was doing something that was problematic did not make it less so. Me not knowing that that was offensive to an entire group of people did not stop it from being offensive to an entire group of people. So that's why I think ignoring it isn't a problem. I would love to see a show that has a problematic black female character and think it's not race related. I would love to, yes. But that's not a privilege I have. Not in a society that's still very racist and how it treats people of color. And the reason why I feel like there's a disconnect sometimes when we talk about this issue is because for whites, you guys have a more varied amount of characters to choose from. You have your problematic characters and you have your good characters to balance it out. Marginalized groups, we don't really have that. We don't have that ability to just see a character who is really, really, really stereotyped and be like, it's just a character. Because we don't have enough shows out there to balance out the good and the bad. I feel like sometimes it's better to, when people are like, they just don't care about the issue. When they're honest about it and like they just don't care, that's okay. Because at least it can be like, okay, they don't care one way or another. But pretending that this doesn't exist is worse to me. Because this is the reality of the situation. I mean, let's just put the facts out here. If you were born in this country before 2000, you were born in a country where interracial marriage was still illegal in Alabama. They didn't officially legalize it until then. And 41% of the people still wanted to keep the law. So I was born in a country where I could not marry a white man in one of the states. That's the reality of the situation. We still live in a society that has those kind of things. Just because Obama is in the White House doesn't mean a goddamn thing. It really fucking doesn't. If Hillary Clinton was in the White House right now, women would still make less money than men. Doesn't change anything when you have one token person in a position of power. It really doesn't. And for me, the reason why I feel like I speak so much about stereotypes and why it bothers me is because stereotypes to me are probably the worst form of racism. They are. Because people are quick to justify stereotypes or ignore them. They will excuse racist crows. They'll say it's racist stuff if it's just stereotype. If it's not mean-spirited or completely violent, it's not important. At least with lynching, everyone can agree that's bad. But if you have a crow that talks in obnoxious slang and says stereotypes about black people, you're just looking to be offended. But if it's a lynching, then you can be offended. That's justifiable. So for me, stereotypes are the worst type of racism because you don't know it. People will not ban behind a stereotype the way they will ban behind a lynching. They will say that's wrong. Stereotyping, they'll always have an excuse for that.